The sun burned low over the Arizona desert, spilling gold and crimson across a land haunted by silence and blood. The year was 1863, and the Apache Wars were tearing the Southwest apart. An endless struggle between tribes fighting to keep their freedom and settlers determined to claim the frontier. Amidst this chaos, the story of three women unfolded, women whose lives would cross paths with fate, fire, and the unrelenting cruelty of war. Their names were whispered only in fragments by those who survived, the ones who had seen what happened in the canyons when the sun went down and the Apaches came riding. Margaret Hale had been born in Virginia but followed her husband west in search of land and peace. Instead, she found fear and endless wind. Their small homestead stood near the Gila River, a fragile mark of civilization surrounded by endless wilderness. Margaret had learned to draw water from a dry well, to fire a rifle, and to live with the eerie quiet that came before danger. But on one fateful evening, that quiet broke with the thunder of hooves. Before she could even reach the door, she saw flames rise from the barn. Her husband shouted, firing into the darkness. Arrows hissed through the air like serpents. When the smoke cleared, the house was in ashes, her husband gone, and Margaret, barefoot and bound, was taken by the Apache warriors, her screams swallowed by the desert wind. For days they rode through canyons and cliffs, where the sun burned mercilessly and the nights were colder than death. Margaret, bruised and terrified, learned to walk silently, to drink from muddy water and to endure the mocking laughter of her captors. But among them was one who did not laugh, Taza, a young Apache warrior with eyes that carried both fury and sorrow. He had lost his sister to a soldier's bullet months before, and though he despised the settlers, something about Margaret's quiet strength kept him from treating her like an enemy. When another warrior raised his hand to strike her, Taza stopped him. From that moment, Margaret's fate was tied to his, a bond born in violence, confusion, and survival. As the days turned to weeks, Margaret saw things no settler could ever imagine. She saw Apache women grieving for children taken by soldiers, old men staring into dying campfires, and warriors who sang to the spirits of the mountain before going into battle. There was savagery, yes, but there was also sorrow. It was a war without innocence, where both sides carried scars. Margaret was neither prisoner nor guest. She was something in between, a living symbol of everything they hated and everything they'd lost. Far from her world, another captive woman fought her own battle. Her name was Elena Vargas, a Mexican girl of 17, taken from a ranch near Sonora. She was fierce and defiant, with black eyes that dared even her captors to break her. Yet beneath her courage burned grief for the father she saw fall, and the home she would never see again. Margaret and Elena met one cold night when the tribe camped near the Sierra Madre. They spoke in whispers, sharing food, tears, and fragments of prayer. Together they became each other's only comfort. In the darkness of the canyon they dreamed of escape, not knowing that escape in this land was just another kind of death. Taza watched them in silence, torn between his duty and the strange ache he felt when he saw Margaret shivering in the cold. One night when the others slept, he placed a small piece of cooked rabbit near her fire and turned away before she could thank him. The war had made monsters of many men, but something human still flickered inside him, yet fate is cruel to those who try to fight it. Word spread among the Apache warriors that the army was closing in. Taza's tribe would have to move deeper into the mountains, carrying the captives with them, or kill them to prevent their rescue. The choice tore at Taza's soul like the claws of a spirit. As dawn broke, the camp stirred with restless whispers. The women were ordered to march again, their hands bound, their faces pale with exhaustion. Margaret looked at the horizon, an endless stretch of sand and rock. She thought of her husband's smile, of the home they'd built together, now ashes on the wind. She thought of freedom, of faith, of the cruel beauty of a world that gave and took without mercy. Then she heard Taza's voice behind her, low and urgent. "Tonight," he whispered, "follow the stars east. Do not look back." That night, when the warriors drank and sang their battle songs, Taza loosened the ropes that bound Margaret and Elena. He pointed toward the valley below, where the moonlight shimmered on the river. "Go," he said. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but before she could speak, he stepped back into the shadows. They fled, running barefoot through thorns and stones, the sound of drums echoing behind them. Every breath was a prayer. Every heartbeat was a scream. They reached the river just as the first arrow struck the water beside them. Elena stumbled, her leg bleeding, but Margaret pulled her forward, refusing to let her fall. They waded through the icy current, crawling up the opposite bank as shouts filled the night. Then came the gunfire, sharp cracking echoing through the canyon. Soldiers appeared on the ridge, firing into the dark. Chaos erupted. Warriors fell. Horses screamed. Margaret turned back just in time to see Taza standing in the moonlight, arrows whistling past him. He met her gaze for a brief, eternal second. Then he was gone, swallowed by the smoke and the storm of bullets. When the sun rose, Margaret and Elena were found by a cavalry patrol. Half dead and trembling beside the river, they were taken to Fort Bowie, where their story spread like wildfire. Newspapers called them the women who escaped the Apache. But Margaret never spoke of Taza, nor of the faces she had seen in that camp, the mothers, the children, the warriors who fought for a dying world. She knew the truth was too complicated for the world to understand. The Apache were not demons. They were people caught in the gears of a merciless history. Years later, Margaret lived quietly in a small town near Tucson. She rarely spoke of the past, but sometimes she would sit by the fire, her eyes distant, and whisper a name no one recognized. The scars on her hands remained, and so did the memories, of a land both savage and sacred, of a war that devoured everyone, and of the tragic fate that bound all women, captive or free, to the same cruel destiny. Her story, like so many others, faded into the dust of history, but if you listen closely to the desert wind, some say you can still hear her voice, soft, trembling, carried through the canyons that once echoed with war. It tells of courage born from despair, of mercy in the heart of darkness, and of the price of survival in a world where innocence had no place to hide. And as her voice fades, remember, every forgotten story deserves to be heard. Every life lost to violence deserves to be remembered. If you believe such stories must live on, subscribe to the channel, join the voice that refuses to let history be forgotten, and help keep these echoes of the past alive. Because the truth of what happened in those canyons should never fade with the wind.